And joining us now as we take a bit of a tour around the country to get a look at how crops are looking in certain areas. We're joined by Wally West with Syngenta. Wally, great to catch up with you again, sir.
Boy,
How are
great.
you?
Well, thank you, Jesse. I'm doing very well. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for joining us, Wally. I want to talk first about crop conditions in your neck of the woods, kind of looking northwest Iowa, southeast South Dakota, northeast Nebraska. That's been a spot that we've been see grow redder and redder on the drought monitor here the past few weeks. So catch us up. What are you seeing in the fields? What are you hearing from farmers in the region? How are things looking right now?
Good, excellent question, as always. So I would state, or I would believe, the crop in the area that I watch closest is mostly eastern South Dakota. Actually, all of South Dakota, eastern South Dakota, into southwest Minnesota, a little bit in northwest Iowa. Overall, the crop is average to just above average. There, as you mentioned, there is a bit of a hot spot around the Sioux City area. That seems to be missing some showers that stretches up into southeast South Dakota, maybe a little bit of corner of northeast Nebraska. So there certainly are some spots where the stresses unfortunately are kicking in. That's not anything really out of ordinary. It seems like this time of year will last few years anyway. After 2019, where everywhere was wet, it's like ever since then we've kind of been getting back into a bit of an average weather pattern where there's kind of the haves and have-nots when it comes to moisture.
Well, as we think about, some of those maybe have-nots with a lack of moisture, Wally, one has to wonder what are some stresses that we need to keep an eye out for. I mean, I've heard of things like pineappling corn, for instance, some things like that. But as you look at some of those more drought-stressed crops, what are some things that farmers really need to keep an eye on right now?
Yeah, so stresses in general fall into two categories, two buckets, if you will. There are abiotic stresses and biotic stresses. Biotic, as is implied by the title, it's stress, it's crop stress in the form of a natural pathogen. It can be a weed, an insect, a disease. Those are all biotic stresses. On the other side, the other category is abiotic stresses, of which drought is or drought or moisture stress is an abiotic stress. There are other abiotic stresses to crops, to our crops that can include compaction. That's an abiotic stress. Hail. That's an abiotic stress. Gosh, something is seemingly innocuous as cloud cover when corn is pollinating can be an abiotic stress. So generally, I'd like to lead off with that in any discussion about stress because, interestingly enough, there's certainly different ways to handle those two categories, but there are some similarities also in some of the products, some of the solutions to both biotic and abiotic stresses.
Well, as we look at things, I know we obviously saw a later planted crop this year, so
Yeah.
everything's been slightly delayed. But I wonder, we've been seeing some spraying, something like a fungicide, an application here that could maybe help things out, help that plant health a little bit if we're still maybe trying to wait on some rains in some areas. Talk about that a little bit, Wally. What are some
Yeah.
things we could maybe do?
Yeah, will do. So, thinking about fungicides specifically, back in the origins of fungicides, of which when you think about the innovation story around Syngenta, we were at the leading edge of the majority of the primary active ingredients that we use today in our industry around fungicides, so specifically fungicides. And the early days of those, they were specifically designed for a disease or a biotic stress management, in this case, fungal diseases. Fast forward to now, what we've learned through research and development, and specifically this relatively newer class of fungicides called the SDHI inhibitors, that they have benefits in the absence of disease. That's where the abiotic stress management comes in. For example, we know that a product like Miravis Neo and also Trivapro have benefits in the absence of disease, plant health benefits, if you will, and we know through research and development exactly how that works within the plant. One of the simplest ways to look at it when you think about drought stress, for example, a corn plant and a soybean plant in particular, they're predisposed to transpirate, to move moisture from the soil up through the plant and out the leaves. A product like Mirabis Neo, for example, can actually slow that transpiration at the and not at the expense of reducing the photosynthesis. That's the ability of the plant to produce starches and sugars and ultimately to protein, ultimately to grain yield. So it's really interesting what these products or a product like Mirabis Neo can do, not only for the biotic stresses like disease management, but also the abiotic stresses, something as simple as helping mitigate drought stress. You mentioned the onion leafing on corn. That is a symptom of drought stress, and you can quite often see the tangible effect that the corn that's been sprayed with a product like Mirabis Neo, that onion leafing can maybe it's something as simple as later in the day before it does start to onion leaf. That onion leafing is a protection mechanism of the corn plant to help protect itself, and by helping the plant limit the evapotranspiration through the leaf, it onion leaves less.
Definitely. Well,
Yeah,
and everything you mentioned there as well. I just think with growers, with the way commodity prices are here this year, with looking for the best ROI, thinking about using products like you mentioned, Mirabis Neo and Triva Pro, I would just have to think that would be huge for a grower just to try and preserve, the
yeah,
best yields they can with this just the way everything is right now with the markets and then watching
yep,
the weather, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah. Well said. Don't have a lot to add to that, but you're exactly right. The return on investment is quite striking on products like both Mirabis Neo and Triva Pro. A lot of farmers will use, I've learned from experience, they'll generally use a 2-to-1 return on their investment, and that's very achievable. In fact, substantially better than that. But anytime we're working in the environment and in a biological environment, it's often tough to put your finger on exactly what that ROI is going to be, but boy, certainly the probability is very high in helping that stress mitigation, both the biotic stresses and the abiotic stresses.
Wally, I should have asked this as well a bit earlier in our discussion, but I'll ask it now. Any major disease pressures you're seeing in your region? Are we seeing anything like frog eye leaf spot or et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, yes. Unfortunately, we are seeing just this morning. I came out of a had a plot tour up in east central South Dakota, and we did identify a light infestation of frog eye leaf spot that far north already. So it certainly is an excellent reminder that generally speaking, when our soybean crop reaches kind of that R2 R3 stage, that's when we may see some frog eye leaf spot. We've seen it the last few years. It isn't always yield impacting, but it certainly is out there. And as diseases can happen, they certainly happen very rapidly in some cases. The generally for most of the diseases that we're fighting, a product like Mirabis Neo, a product like Trivapro, they have both curative and preventative components in them. So there can be some visual symptoms when the application is made, and then the two preventative components kick in and help prevent. To the point of both of those products have phenomenally strong. Both Trivapro and Mirabis Neo have very strong residual control on product on diseases like frog eye leaf spot and soybeans. I'm hearing a few reports into Minnesota. I haven't personally seen it yet, but tar spot in southern Minnesota, it's another pathogen, a corn pathogen that we're keeping a sharp eye on. It tends to currently affect more the central and the eastern corn belt, but we know from experience that it's almost like dropping a rock in a pond when it comes to disease pressure. It moves out from the point as that pathogen continues to grow and evolve. So we're keeping a sharp eye out for it, but so far so good. It's not in our immediate area.
Yeah, tar spot though, that is something that you hit it on the head. It is moving farther and farther to the west, and that's something we're going to be keeping our eye on very closely. Wally, any other final thoughts for us, real quick before we run out of time?
Well, just want to say thank you for the time, and I want to thank all your listeners for their support of Syngenta products. We say that with the utmost certainly desire to continue our strong relationship in the market. We continue to develop and sell and market products that impact your listeners very very favorably. So we certainly do appreciate the support.
Well, we appreciate the time and the insight with that. Wally West of Syngenta. Always a pleasure, sir. Have a fantastic one, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Jesse.